All right, thank you everyone for logging in to tonight's webinar. I know it's pretty late for some of you out there logging in from all over the world, so we'd like to get started, kind of dive right in. Tonight's Beacon Stack webinar is over Will Eddystone take on iBeacon in 2016? It's a big topic that's on a lot of our minds. My name is Perry Nunes. I'm a marketing associate here at Mobstack, and I'm joined by my colleague Neha Malik, a senior marketer.
Thanks, Perry. I'm really excited to be part of this webinar and share my insights on iBeacon, Eddystone, and how the Beacon ecosystem will pan out in 2016. I'm sure our attendees are equally excited. So let's get started.
So we like to start all of our webinars with a little bit of Beacon basics. We know that a lot of you have either logged into past webinars or you've done a lot of your own research, but we'll go over the basics to make sure everyone's on the same page. So beacons are low-cost, low-power transmitters that are equipped with Bluetooth Low Energy, or BLE. Sometimes it's called Bluetooth 4.0, Bluetooth Smart. These are all names for the same thing, which are a basic low-energy radio transmission coming from the beacon hardware itself. And this piece of hardware actually helps mobile devices around it to detect their relative proximity and ultimately determine microlocation, especially in indoor settings. Beacons themselves don't actually transmit content, but using BLE, they transmit a series of identifying numbers. And we'll go into a bit of detail on how that transmission differs between iBeacon and Eddystone. And what this does is the transmitted signal allows another device, typically the mobile app on it, to identify it and then determine that device's relative proximity to the beacon. Then that app or that device can then trigger a certain action when it's within a certain proximity of that beacon for a certain amount of time, such as sending interactive targeted content, tracking certain analytics, among many other use cases, which we'll talk to you about tonight.
Well, thanks, Perry. I'll quickly talk about the agenda for this webinar. So today we'll talk about the differences between iBeacon and Eddystone, as Perry just mentioned. Then we look at the beacon format you should use according to the use cases you have in mind and the kind of objectives you want to gain from your beacon campaigns. Later on, we'll talk about what 2016 holds for the beacon space and which beacon format will rule the roost and why. Coming to the end of the session, we'll talk about what the app problem is. Most of you would already know that the most common problem faced by businesses today is that they don't have an app really to implement a beacon strategy. So we'll cover the hype around Eddystone and why, if it really eliminates the need for an app, how much of truth that holds, and how significant is the app problem, and if there's a way to solve it. Lastly, we'll talk about things to keep in mind about developing a beacon app. So let's get started with the differences between iBeacon and Eddystone.
Thanks, Neha. So we'll jump into the basic foundation of tonight's webinar: iBeacon versus Eddystone. Two major protocols or formats for the beacon hardware itself. iBeacon announced by Apple and Eddystone by Google. So first on iBeacon, it's Android and iOS compatible, but it's native only for iOS. So important to keep in mind, depending on kind of who your user base is and what types of devices they use. Also, it broadcasts one advertising packet and a unique ID. In this advertising packet, it has three main identifying numbers called a UUID number, major number, and a minor number. And those are used to identify each specific beacon through the combination of those three IDs. On the Eddystone front, it's Android and iOS compatible, but is supported in the Chrome browser app, making sense as a protocol by Google. And Eddystone, rather than just the one advertising packet of iBeacon, broadcasts three different types of advertising packets. The first one, UID, which is very similar to the UUID format of iBeacon, but it also has two additional ones. One being Eddystone URL, in which an app detecting the beacon can go directly to a customized URL without the app having to convert that numeric identifier to a destination web address. So it's actually broadcasting a URL address from the beacon itself. And then lastly, there's Eddystone TLM, as in telemetry, which is basic health status information such as battery life on that beacon. This is really useful for when you're managing a large fleet of beacons and you want to quickly see what the battery life is and what the signal strength is on those beacons. Also on iBeacon, the signals that are broadcasted are open and can be detected by any iOS or Android device. And because it's only one advertising packet, it's relatively simple to implement. On Google's front, there's something called ephemeral identifiers, or EIDs, which is a security feature that Eddystone is planning, in which broadcast signals can only be identified by authorized clients because the beacon IDs themselves are not permanent. They don't last forever, and they're constantly changing. It is flexible. Eddystone is very flexible, but it does require complex coding during integration because you do have to deal with these 3 different packets of data being broadcasted.
Okay, thanks, Perry. Those were some really useful insights. Moving on, let's talk about this very common perception around Eddystone. This is a question that we get asked very often by clients and customers alike. Can Eddystone beacons work without an app? Well, the truth is that to detect an Eddystone URL, you need an app. On Android, it's the physical web browser and the Chrome browser, whereas on iOS, it's the Chrome browser with Today notifications on. To put it very simply, Google hasn't really killed the need for an app. It's just that instead of a very specific, say a retail app, you need the browser installed on your phone. Sorry. So we'd like to reiterate the point that it's not really as if the need for the app has been killed completely. So moving on, let's look at the kind of format that suits your business most. Perry, could you take?
Yes, definitely. And I think that's a good point that Google hasn't necessarily killed the need for an app. This whole idea for an app is a really big conundrum for people exploring beacons. So stay tuned as we talk about, instead of developing your own app or maybe going through Chrome with Eddystone, what might be a good alternative for those looking to go through beacon deployments that don't yet have an app already established. But generally speaking, now that we've laid the groundwork from a technology standpoint, for all of you marketers out there who might want to use beacon technology, we want to go over some broad characteristics of use cases that are good for both iBeacon and for Eddystone. iBeacon, as we've discussed, requires an app, which makes it ideal for targeted, personalized marketing. With an app, you get a whole host of information on that app user, maybe their past shopping preferences, their loyalty points, their demographic information, and you can use all of that to create really rich, targeted marketing campaigns for your physical space using iBeacon. For Eddystone, on the other hand, it's really good for generic location-based marketing, where you're not necessarily targeting people based off any other factor other than their pure proximity to your beacons, based off their location. So this is really good for blanket advertising, things like real-time transportation updates at bus stops, things that you want to send to every single person who has Chrome on their phone who comes in proximity of your beacons.
Thanks for that, Perry. So let's move on to the common use cases that we can expect from Eddystone and iBeacon. Talking about Eddystone first, the first thing that comes to our mind is public spaces. Say, for example, a movie theater could just install Eddystone beacons on movie posters, and all visitors nearby would receive a URL to a web page that contains promotional videos or any other information about the movie. This makes a lot of sense for sending promotional content, and you don't really need to build an app for promoting a single movie and expect people to download an app to just receive such content. For use cases like this, Eddystone suits the bill completely. Let's talk about the next use case.
Yeah, thanks, Neha. It's actually fairly similar. It's also kind of has to deal with public places and public utility. We've seen a really interesting one in which beacons were used at parking meters to help digitize and simplify the payment process. Anyone who's used public parking lot knows it's kind of a pain to feed the meter or pay with cash when you're checking out at a kiosk. So this use case using beacons, what it did is allowed the beacons to point to a web page where the meter's specific ID number is encoded in that URL that is sent to the customer's phone. So the customer's phone would come within proximity of the meter. They would be sent to a web page specific to that meter that had logged how long they had been parked there, and they could then open up that web page to pay for their parking fees using a credit card or some other online payment solution. Really, really interesting kind of parking meter of the future, if you will.
Oh, sounds great.
And also another thing up this alley is we've actually seen recently one of the first large-scale Eddystone beacon deployments, in which there was a beacon network in the United Kingdom that launched a service called MyStop. And what MyStop did was it sent transport alerts automatically to the smartphone of users who had Chrome app installed and Bluetooth turned on. And that was via beacons that were installed on London buses. So if you're riding a London bus, around the greater London area, Without even having a transportation app, you could be getting real-time transportation updates via your Chrome browser. MyStop started on these buses, and it's planning to eventually expand to malls, stadiums, city centers, other big events, making it one of the largest Eddystone beacon deployments we've seen thus far using the technology.
Oh, that's great. Sounds interesting. So moving on to the next use case, I think Eddystone can be used at restaurants for the queuing system. So the way it could work is, guests waiting for a table could be sent a URL that allows them to join a digital queue, and they could be made aware of the wait times they could expect to get a table assigned. This saves a lot of time of the staff and in managing guests, and also helps guests not get bogged down by the waiting time, or not being made aware of how much time it's going to take, or the information not be available just at the time that they need. So I think Eddystone is great for use cases such as these. Moving on, let's talk about the use cases for iBeacon.
Thanks, Neha. Yeah, so as I mentioned, as we move into these iBeacon use cases, you're going to see a lot more personalization, a lot more, customer segmentation, customer targeting, or giving you services based off, your unique profile. A really good example of this, of providing personalized services, was Nordstrom, a large department store. They leveraged beacons to offer a really seamless experience that kind of bridged the mobile shopping experience with the offline shopping experience in the actual Nordstrom stores, in which users who opted into receiving what Nordstrom was calling near store notifications, they would receive alerts when the items that they had previously put in their online shopping cart were actually in stock at a store they were walking by. So as a retailer, a really great way to drive traffic into your store, drive sales, but also create a really, kind of unified omni-channel experience for customers who are already using your app and looking to purchase items through your app as well.
Oh, that's interesting. So moving on to the next one, about retargeting. So beacons offer a great opportunity to retarget customers. A lot of you must be wondering what really retargeting is. So apart from targeting, there's also this term called retargeting, where customers who are interested in the kind of messages you're sending, and then you reach out to them again to maybe send more offers or interesting product videos or any other information you'd want to share with your customers. So the example I'm talking about is how Coca-Cola leveraged the VG app to retarget moviegoers at Kappa Cinemas. So the way it worked is, moviegoers were sent coupons to redeem a free Coke, and only those people who redeemed the coupon on that day were retargeted again with a free movie ticket via the VG app a week later. So there was no blanket promotion done to everyone who visited the theater. It was just that people who redeemed the coupon once and showed some kind of interest in receiving such notifications were again retargeted a week later. So this kind of retargeting really leverages the use of beacons and makes the whole experience much more smoother.
Thanks, Neha. I appreciate that. And then lastly, we have a use case for iBeacon about boosting loyalty programs. The cosmetics chain Sephora leveraged beacons in a really unique, personalized way to send out birthday alerts to their customers via their Sephora To Go app. So this is a great example. It's not even the most sophisticated of use cases, but it really delivers a really delightful experience for customers. They simply use very basic information on a customer's birthday to then remind them to pick up a special complimentary package as a birthday gift, kind of a nice thank you for being a loyal customer and using their app. So this goes to show that iBeacon, while it does open up the door for a lot of very sophisticated retargeting and targeting, you can also use it for very basic but very powerful user experiences.
I'm sure, Perry, it's your birthday coming up recently. I mean, quite soon, so you'd expect some kind of coupon from Sephora, knowing they have just opened store nearby.
Oh, without a doubt. I heard they just went down in the neighborhood,
yeah,
so just in time.
I hope you get one soon. Okay, moving on to the next one. So for people who are still undecided about, whether they should opt for Eddystone or iBeacon, we would suggest you could buy a beacon stack beacon, which has, which are both compliant with iBeacon and Eddystone protocols. And if you buy the starter kit, you also get iOS and Android SDKs, the Beacon Stack app for iOS and Android, and also the access to Beacon Stack platform for 1 year. So people who are wondering what this access to the platform really means. So whenever we talk about targeting people based on, say, demographics or age group, or where they are in the store, You can do all of this very simply using our dashboard by setting up some rules in the dashboard and targeting the very same customers you want to target. So, this is a great way to set up campaigns without having to do a lot of setting up a lot of code in the app itself. So I'm sure you'd find it really interesting and useful if you want to opt for, using Beacon or Eddystone. Also, I would like to say that, if you have any questions, feel free to type in, because we'll answer questions at the end of the session. So feel free to type in your questions.
Thanks, Naya, for telling us a little bit about Beacon Stack and kind of how it can help them accomplish everything from the hardware to the software. So moving forward, we want to kind of move to the meat of the webinar. What does 2016 hold for iBeacon and Eddystone? Which one will be developing a lot? Which one might be stagnating? Which one should you choose for your own business? So I'll talk a bit about Eddystone first off. There hasn't been anything officially announced. However, Google does say that they plan to provide developers a cloud-based registry for all Eddystone beacons deployed. So when I say cloud-based registry, I think of it kind of like a yellow pages for beacons. You get developers will be able to look up basic information such as Google Place ID, maybe where that beacon is on, which floor in a building that beacon is on, which can help them to give more context to the apps and the experience that they create around those apps with those Eddystone beacons. This registry has the potential, with the scale of a company like Google, to be scaled to manage billions of unique devices. And as I mentioned, apps can use the registry to learn things like the beacon's meaning, its context, or even its exact location within a building.
Oh, that's interesting. So looking at how Eddystone will look like in 2016. So I'm sure you've all heard about Google's recent announcement about Eddystone support for Chrome browser on Android. Well, this comes 8 months after Eddystone was announced, so I'm not really very impressed by the pace things are moving on. But still, this is quite a huge announcement, considering there's so many Android people using Android phones. So the way it works is, the first time a user is in the vicinity of an Eddystone beacon, they receive a notification asking them to enable physical web. Post that, they just receive notifications wherever there's an Eddystone beacon nearby, pushing them URLs or any other such information. Also, these notifications are very unobtrusive. They don't really have a sound attached to it, or some very big message or something. It's just a very unobtrusive message that you see on the screen, and if you click on it, you can go further to a URL or anything like that. So it doesn't really disturb you, only when you're really wanting to check what's nearby. Maybe you see a notification and you feel like clicking on it. So that's how Eddystone looks like in 2016. Moving on to iBeacon, let's talk about what iBeacon will look like in 2016.
Yeah, so on the iBeacon front, there have been several rumors, as there always is with Apple coming up, with the new technology. There's a lot of rumors swirling, but two of the biggest ones that we've heard are very likely to happen in 2016. iBeacon will be deeply integrated with Apple for Business, which will help businesses to provide another layer of context using proximity to business apps. So we might see, more small, medium-sized businesses or even larger businesses leveraging iBeacon technology for proximity-based campaigns. Also, a big thing is that Apple's rumored to be developing its own indoor location strategy that will work with Apple Maps, similar to how Apple Maps helps with outdoor navigation and geofencing and all of that. Apple's rumored to be using iBeacon technology along with Wi-Fi and sensor fusion to develop its own indoor location strategy. And even it's rumored to be trialing its own handset-based technology in 2016. So we'll see if those rumors develop into anything substantive, but it's exciting to kind of follow what the big tech giants up to next in indoor navigation.
Wow, that's some useful information, Perry. I didn't know that. So moving on to the next slide, which talks about which iBeacon format will lead the pack in 2016. So by the looks of it, looks like iBeacon has a higher adoption rate. If you look at this graph here, which lists the number of proximity companies which are either using iBeacon or Eddystone from Q2 2015 to Q4 2015. If you look at the graph, Eddystone, though it started from 7, is right now at 93, which is increase in percentage from 5% to 38% of proximity marketing businesses. iBeacon, on the other hand, has around 226 companies using it. So there's a very remarkable difference in in the way iBeacon protocol has been adopted by various industries and businesses. So I think we can very safely say that, in this year at least, we can be sure that iBeacon will see a lot more implementations and greater adoption from various industries. And the pace at which iBeacon is growing, I'm sure it'll be the number one iBeacon protocol in the years to come.
Thanks, Neha. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand with your point. Um, it's iBeacon's already been adopted by so many businesses, and that's because, given it's an older technology and it was released in 2013. It's a finished project, so it doesn't need constant, or in the case of Eddystone, maybe, intermittent, or, kind of few and far between feature updates. iBeacon itself, because it's a well-established product, can help provide businesses with kind of a whole innovative ecosystem that is very clear about its value, rather than just releasing, one or two new features every couple of months. This ecosystem allows developers to use, proximity APIs. There's a certified iBeacon hardware program, which provides a lot of people doing different rollouts, a large variety of beacons to choose from. And even the fact that all iOS devices themselves can act as under iBeacon, and transmit iBeacon is a step in the right direction for providing the full ecosystem of support that developers, marketers, businesses need to deploy beacons.
Oh, that's interesting. Uh, yeah, like you said, iBeacon is a finished product and doesn't really need much feature updates. Looking at Eddystone, on the other hand, like I said, it's been 8 months and we've not really seen a lot of progress happening on that front. Eddystone coming from Google, one would have expected that there's a fair amount of integration available for all Google products such as AdWords, Maps, Analytics, but we haven't seen any of those announcements coming, and the way the pace at which the announcements being done doesn't really look very impressive this year either. In fact, if it was launched on time, the integrations could have been the biggest value factor for Eddystone, which is not the case right now. Also, as long as Eddystone exists as in isolation from different from the Google platform itself, the two types that are Eddystone URL and telemetry, which really made the difference between iBeacon and Eddystone, will not be so advantageous unless Google supports the integration with its other products. So, again, reiterating the same point that we don't expect a lot to happen on the Eddystone front in 2016 either. So, moving on to the next slide, which is about the app problem. So, Perry, what do you have on this?
Yeah, so this app problem, we've addressed it already a few times tonight. It's probably on a lot of your minds. I want to use beacons, I want this context, but I don't want to develop an app. People think that either you have to develop your own app, or you have to go with a third-party app, maybe an aggregator app. That's not always the case. There's actually a third option, and that's to integrate with Apple's Passbook. So this doesn't require users to download any other third-party app. They can simply add your store-specific pass or loyalty card to their Passbook. So then, once in store, the brand, the retailer, whoever you may be, can detect a customer's location using beacons, and then trigger your really contextual messages and offers actually via the Passbook app itself. This will help you as a brand to identify which offers are being redeemed, and you can adjust your promotions accordingly. But also for customers, it's much more convenient and allows them to actually save coupons on their phone. So as a customer, if I'm getting coupons, I want to be able to save those for later, and that's a functionality that Passbook allows.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I would also like to share this thinking about, a lot of people not being aware of, how they can use Passbook. So all this hype around Eddystone, really deleting the need for an app. If you use Passbook, you get very same features. And also, if you want to use third-party apps, I think you could, opt for apps which are already very popular with customers, say something like Shazam, which the Fox Studios used recently, or something like WeChat, which was used by Chai Tong-fook, or any such popular app, rather than something to do with a beacon network specific app, I would say. So looking at a good Passbook integration example, this is the Werribee Plaza in Sydney, Australia, which leveraged beacons along with free Wi-Fi. So the way it worked was shoppers who entered the mall were given access to free Wi-Fi, where they could just view the catalog of offers available for them. and these offers could be saved on Apple's passbook, and they could be redeemed at the store, at the exact store within the mall. So beacons were set up around the center, and they could trigger messages on the device reminding the shopper that, okay, there's an offer in this store which you could redeem. So this was a very good use case of, how you could target customers even if you don't have your own app. Quite
Fantastic
interesting.
example, Neha. Thank you.
So moving on to the next slide, which is about, things to keep in mind when developing a beacon app. Well, I mean, the list is endless, but just to name a few. Firstly, choose the right operating system. So you need to be aware of, what devices your customers are using. If 90% of your customers are on Android, you would prefer to build an Android app first for your business, a beacon enabled Android app for that matter. Again, choose a feature set that keeps in mind the limitations that beacon technology has. Say, for example, the accuracy, the exact accuracy that you can expect from beacons, they're not really pinpoint. So you need to keep that in mind when you're thinking of features. The third thing is about transparency, since there's so much of hype around, how secure are beacons, or, privacy issues. Do beacons track us, or do they save our data? It's best to let your users know about, all the privacy policies you have in place, why you're collecting the data, what you're going to do with the data. Make them aware of it, and I'm sure they'll buy in before they, download your app. Also, a very important thing to keep in mind is the Bluetooth off states. I'm sure a lot of developers often miss out on this point, which is extremely important, and you can totally, you know, make the customer experience much more powerful using the Bluetooth off state. And lastly, like to talk about the onboarding itself. A lot of apps have a lot of features, but users are not really aware of what they can achieve using the app. So a good onboarding session will prepare them for the features they can expect and how the app is going to help them.
Wow, thank you. I'll let you catch your breath, Neha, and then you can talk a little bit more about an ebook that actually helps people guide people to building their own
Yeah.
Beacon app.
Yeah, so this is an ebook we recently published. It's available on our blog as well, and we'll share the link with you on chat right now. So this ebook really is called The Developer's Guide to Building a Beacon App. So it covers the basic beacon terminologies, the common challenges such as beacon ranging, monitoring, background beacon detection, step-by-step process to coding an iOS and an Android beacon app, and also some best practices to follow when building an app. So everything from onboarding to making people aware of the privacy settings to how to factor in interference, everything is covered in this ebook. So be sure to download this right now.
Fantastic. And after you log out of the webinar, you're excited to learn more about Eddystone and iBeacon, and you read this developer's guide and you say, okay, I'm ready. I want to deploy my own Beacon project. The Beacon Stack Kit is the best way to get started. It has both hardware and software. As Neha mentioned, we have our enterprise-grade beacons that support both iBeacon and Eddystone. We have the Beacon Stack app for both iOS and Android, which allows you to add and manage your beacons, but also if you haven't yet developed your own application, it can serve as a nice demo app, so you can demo proximity campaigns for internal purposes, maybe to get some stakeholders on board. And then lastly, it provides access to our cloud-based proximity and analytics platform called Beacon Stack. The Beacon Stack platform, which is kind of your one-stop shop for all of your campaign management. You can create customized cards to be sent. You can set up rules and to trigger certain actions to send these cards and other types of actions when people are in proximity of beacons. It's a very easy to use, very simple, but it all comes within access of that Beacon Stack platform. We do have three main types of kits: the starter kit, the pilot kit, and the deployment kit, depending on which stage your beacon project currently is. They each come with the hardware, the beacons themselves, the Beacon Stack app and SDKs, as well as the platform. The only thing that's different is the number of beacons that come in each kit. So the starter kit for $89 comes with 3 beacons, and that's ideal if you're just getting started with beacons and you want to do a very basic proof of concept or an internal demo. The starter kit's a good way to go. The pilot kit, which is our most popular kit, is for $199. You can get 9 beacons, which is really good for small pilots, or even a little bit more comprehensive of internal demos. If you want to, if you're a larger enterprise, or even if you're a small or medium-sized business who has a bit more of a complex use case, a pilot kit's a great way to go to get started. And then lastly, a deployment kit with 30 beacons, which is really good for mid-sized deployments. It's $699. So that's good. Again, if maybe you've already tested out beacons and you're ready to maybe do a mid-sized deployment at one store or one location for your brand. I also do want to mention we do have an early bird offer for webinar attendees. So that's all of you. You can use the beacon code, the coupon code BEACON15, all caps BEACON followed by 15, to get 15% off any of the starter kit purchases if you do it within 24 hours. So today, if you order with this beacon code, you can get 15% off the starter kit purchase.
That's nice. So moving on, feel free to share your questions. We've received a few already, but if you have any more questions, please type in. We'll try and answer as many as possible.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a question that came in regarding can banks use beacons for large-scale marketing? Yes, absolutely. We've seen banks do a lot of really interesting things with proximity marketing. One thing you can do is to help enhance the waiting experience. A lot of people that are coming to use financial services at a bank are waiting in long lines, and so you can send digital content, ranging from stock prices to other relevant content to that person's profile while they're waiting in line. And you can also send, in addition to just content, you can send personalized offers that can help, deliver targeted digital product content based off, new financial products that your bank's offering right there in the context of a bank waiting room.
Yep. So the next question is about whether Bluetooth needs to be turned on for receiving and sending out messages. So the answer is yes, but with the exception of Android. On Android, Bluetooth can be turned on programmatically, but for iOS and for use cases at large, it is expected that users turn on their Bluetooth to start receiving notifications.
Well, Rahul, thanks for that. That was our product manager at Beacon Stack trying to help us with the questions. So thanks a lot, Rahul.
Sure. Yep. So there's another question from a Beacon Stack customer. So thanks a ton for purchasing our beacons. It's about beacon detection not being 100% available, or 100% of the times detectable. Well, there are certain caveats to beacon detection. First up being the placement of the beacon, and the second one being the physical barriers. So make sure that the beacon placement is fine. There are not too many barriers between the devices. So you will have to be a little strategic with the point of interest that you choose for placing beacons. Just make sure that it's placed at those points where the physical barriers are not too much, so that there is lesser interference and more chances of your users being able to connect with the beacons.
Great. And I had another question from someone who's asking, have we seen any examples of Eddystone being used in residential communities? Say you're a housing provider and you want to test out if Eddystone can be used in residential communities. We have seen URLs being broadcasted in residential communities for basic property information on a house. Maybe that's for sale, or you can even if you're introducing new people to your neighborhood, or if you're a real estate agent, you can direct users to a web page where they can actually take an interactive guided property tour of that property in your residential community.
Yep. So another question about the Beacon Stack app and platform being used by the admin or by business users. So as a platform, we don't make much of a distinction between the two. I guess by admin you mean people who could be able to update Beacon fleet or be able to change hardware settings. So that's where our Beacon Stack app comes in, so that you can modify and reconfigure your beacons. As far as running campaigns or the business aspect of our platform is concerned, we have a Beacon Stack admin console, which is available at manage.beaconstack.com. Additionally, we also provide configuration information, the latest update on all your beacons through our dashboard. But if you want to configure or manage your fleet, then there is always our Beacon Stack configuration app. It's available both on iOS and Android, and it's there on the app stores.
Great, Rahul. Thanks for that. We have a couple other technical questions that you could probably help us out with. The first one being, someone's wanting to know how Google's Nearby API works with Eddystone beacons. Can you go into that a bit?
Sure. So the Nearby API kind of bridges the gap between beacons and Google Places. It's still under progress, and one of the things that Google is trying to do for Google Places and for basically bridging the gap between Google Places and beacons is to give more context to beacons. And the way they are doing it is through a registry that Perry talked about during the slide. So the whole idea is to provide much more granular information, much more identifiable information about beacons, because let's remember, beacons by themselves just emit certain data points, emit certain signals, but there is no context to those signals. So this is where Google Nearby APIs would come in, where they can tell you about which place is the beacon located at, which floor is the beacon located at, what's the state of the beacon, and a lot of other information that could be leveraged by marketers in the times to come.
Great, thanks, Rahul. We have a question regarding the beacon kits themselves. If we have this deployment kit that has 30 beacons for a mid-sized deployment, how many beacons should be used for a large deployment, like for a big box retailer, or maybe in an entire mall? Really good question, and it depends case to case on if you're doing a large scale deployment, how many beacons you need. The reason that we stopped our kits at 30 is we think that in order to trial your beacons and maybe even do a pilot, 30 is about the largest that you'll need for a basic pilot. Once you've done a beacon pilot and you've gotten a hang of kind of how the Beacon Stack platform works and how to run a proper engaging beacon campaign, we then have separate pricing for a large scale deployment in which you're getting beacons at bulk pricing, and then you're getting access to the platform on its own pricing scheme. And so after you go through a kit, we can work with you depending on how large your deployment is to work out what that might be in terms of numbers.
Yep. So there is a question around that someone has a smartphone, and would it be possible to send out a push notification to wake up the smartphone? So the first thing first, a push notification by itself is not a very is not the optimal thing to do, given that it has to be sent off from a server. So this is where the Beacon Stack SDK comes in. If you have an app, or if you are building an app, then you can use Beacon Stack SDK and use local notifications. So the key difference between local and push is that local notifications originate directly from the phone itself, and there is no dependency on the server. There's no need to wait for a push to be sent out by a server. That's one. In case you don't have an app, then there is a possibility of using the Eddystone URL. These are not going to be push notifications, but the whole idea is to not spam users with a lot of notifications, but to notify users in a very passive way. So the way it works right now is that on an iPhone or on an iOS device that supports iBeacons, you can pull down your notifications bar, move over to the Today widget, and on the Today widget, if you have a Google Chrome extension installed, you will see all the notifications that originate from beacons around you. So it's not a push notification in a very strict form, but it's still a notification, and it's a passive notification.
Great, thanks, Rahul. And the last question we have for the night is, are our beacons approved for use in North America and Europe? And how about indoor and outdoor usage? A good question. Yeah, so we've shipped beacons all around the world. They're approved to be used in countries all across the world, including North America and Europe. As far as indoor versus outdoor, primarily we've seen them used to be deployed indoor, because proximity marketing is most powerful in indoor settings. Our beacons, for large scale deployments of our beacons, we do offer a hardware that's waterproof, but that's only for large scale deployments. So if you're doing a smaller scale, you'll have to be strategic if you're going outdoors to make sure it's weathering the elements correctly. And so that's about it for the questions for now. We hope that we helped out. You had a good time learning about iBeacon versus Eddystone. If you do have any other questions, you can look through our site, www.beaconstack.com. you can send an email to myself, perry@beaconstack.com, or you can send us a tweet at the Twitter handle @beaconstack. Just a reminder of that early bird offer for the starter kit using the coupon code BEACON15, Beacon all capital. You'll be able to get 15% off a starter kit within the next 24 hours. So thanks again for tuning in. We're looking forward to all the Beacon projects to come, and have a great day or night to all of you all around the world.